Hi, I'm Monica Olson.
And I'm Jennifer Walsh.
And you're listening to the Biophilic Solutions podcast, where every other week we sit down with experts and thought leaders across industries in order to explore the innate connection between humans and nature and why we need nature to thrive.
We truly believe that in order to tackle the global environmental problems we're facing, we as humans must reconnect to the natural world and come to a better understanding of how we fit in and how we are so interconnected. So in every episode, we'll interview new guests that help us uncover and highlight nature-based solutions to get us on a path to greater health, tackling climate change, and ultimately getting outside and connecting with nature.
So let's get to today's episode.
Monica, I can't wait to dive into today's episode because we're exploring some new ground that I'm really excited about. And our guest is a really good friend of mine, Dr. Mark Campbell.
Jen, you've shared so much about him. He is fascinating and such a great expert in performance psychology and wellness. Dr. Mark got his professional start working as the lead for U.S. Army's Performance Psychology and Resilience Program. And he also worked for the Warrior Transition Command, which focuses on wounded and ill soldiers. He also did the Army's Warrior Games as well as Prince Harry's Invictus Games. Both of these sports utilize healing of wounded soldiers and servicemen through sports.
He has such an incredible background, doesn't he?
Oh my God, amazing.
And so I know it's amazing. And in addition to his incredible work with soldiers and veterans, Mark also worked for the 2019 World Series champions, the Washington Nationals, as their director of mental conditioning, which I think is so cool. He's also a certified wellness practitioner and a certified workplace wellness specialist through the National Wellness Institute, and is now working as a consultant, using his expertise to connect with an even wider audience. I mean, we can go on and on with the ands, because his background is so illustrious.
I totally agree. So it's like beyond his extensive training, his multiple degrees, one of the through lines of Mark's amazing work has been, you guessed it, nature. He is super passionate outdoorsman in his own right, and he has seen firsthand the amazing benefits of bringing his clients into the outdoors to really facilitate greater wellness. He even hosts a podcast that we both love on a topic called The Nature of Wellness. You know, Jen, I loved when you were on with him and how you referred to him as sort of the OG Dr. Outdoors. I really feel like he needs to use that title.
I know he really does. Okay, so keep listening to hear about Mark's amazing career, bringing more people into nature by meeting them where they are, and his ultimate goal to legitimize the term wellness. Mark, welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, Monica and I have been talking about you for quite some time. Your name has come up quite a few times. So it's been a matter of wrangling all the pieces together to get you finally on the show and talk about all the wonderful work that you do in the world. So we're thrilled to have you.
Yeah, no, I'm super curious. I loved sort of digging in with your resume. And I know Jen has been on your podcast, so you're definitely a pro in this area. But I would love for you to sort of like tell us a little bit about yourself so our listeners can get to know you and your background and kind of how you came into sort of the wellness and performance space as a consultant.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm very honored and humbled to be here. I'm a longtime listener of the show, so a big fan.
Aw,
and this
thanks,
is
Mark.
definitely
Love it. Thank
absolutely.
you.
It's something I've been looking forward to. I was born in a very small town in Kentucky, a one road in, one road out, one stoplight. But the best part about it was that we were surrounded by mountains. So nature has always been a huge part of my life. Spent most every day outside as often as I could, both in athletics and just recreating. I grew up in the era, as a lot of us did, where you were kicked out of the house in the morning and you weren't expected home until the street light came on.
Yes.
But you better be home when the street light came on. So that was a huge part of my upbringing. I was also an athlete, and in that small area, athletics sort of ruled everything and became a big part of my identity. And as I progressed, my parents divorced. My mom moved my brother and I to Florida so that I could have a chance to play baseball at the university that I'd always dreamed of playing at. And I got hurt. I didn't handle it well. I had some people in my life that were contributing to me not handling it well. And I really struggled. I was really in a dark place, and I used nature as a safe space. It was a chance for me to be me again. There wasn't any certain part of my identity that was needed to be outside. I could just be Mark for the first time in a long time. And I realized how much I missed that. So nature was a big part of my healing. And I really started dedicating my time to trying to help other people heal I had moved to Florida to go to the university that I was hoping to play baseball in. And I ended up staying there, and I got a degree in English and communication, which meant I was going to be a waiter with a big vocabulary at the time. But during some of the rehabilitation that I had, I realized that my happiest days were when I went and got body work. So when I would see the massage therapist coming, I would always smile, and I always felt better when they left. And I wanted to help other people in that way. So I went to massage school, started working with athletes again, and I realized I loved game day. I loved being part of the energy and the excitement. So I went back to school and got a degree in sports medicine and exercise science. So I was helping athletes with their physical injuries. And I quickly realized, just like with me, the physical part was the easiest part. It was all of the psychosocial garbage that we drag around with us through that type of adversity. So I decided to do grad school and got into sport and exercise psychology at the University of Tennessee, had a chance to work with some amazing people there, Pat Summitt and others. And I just fell in love with it. And when I left there, I had a professor who we're good friends now, so don't hold anything against him. But he shook my hand and he said, nobody else in the world has the combination of education and ability that you have. You'll never find a home for it. And I was crushed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I took a lesser job at a small college, and I learned a lot there. I don't want to diminish the experience, but I didn't go after what I wanted. And I was working as an assistant athletic trainer. I was teaching sports psychology classes as an adjunct. And after a while, the U.S. Army called and asked me to come to West Point to do a presentation on my grad school research, which was all about helping people with different abilities participate in physical activity. And after the interview or the presentation, they came back and said, hey, we're starting to work with the Wounded Warrior mission. We need your help. We have a home for you if you want it. And
wow.
All I could think about was my experience. What I didn't mention was that my dad served in the Army during Vietnam, wasn't always a really good guy to be around. So all I could think about in that moment was if I could help one family avoid some of the stuff that we went through. So I lost it. I was in a room full of business people and soldiers and just blubbering all over the place. And the gentleman who led the interview left the room, and he came back after a few minutes and he shook my hand and gave me a hug. And he said, welcome. And he said, by the way, so-and-so says hi. And it was the professor that had told me that before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. So when they were looking for somebody with a specific skill set, and they were reaching out to peers in the field, and they had gone to school together years before. And he said, I only know of one person that checks all of those boxes. So that was what led them to me. I led that mission. I was the master trainer for the U.S. Army's Warrior in Transition Command mission for about 8 years. I was in charge of all of the performance psychology programming, training the trainers, worked with Army medicine, worked with standing up the Warrior Transition Command. I helped introduce adaptive sport into the Army, started working with the Surgeon General of the Army on a number of initiatives. It was a dream come true. And it was so many great opportunities to help people manage adversity effectively. And then that pulled me into the Secretary of Defense's office, where I led the military adaptive sports program for a couple of years. Programs like the Warrior Games fell under that office. I was one of the lead U.S. planners for the first year of Prince Harry's Invictus Games. So I got to work closely with Prince Harry and his staff. So one of the best parts about taking over in that position was that I was able to take what was the traditional competitive environment with sporting events and really introduce more outdoor recreation. We brought in things like art therapy, music therapy. We even had a program that came in and taught service members how to make a journal out of the uniform that they were injured in. So they would paper, press it into a journal. The cover still had the digitized pattern on the front and sometimes blood from the injury. And then they would teach them how to journal about their experience. So it was it was very incredible and it was amazing and really allowed for more of a holistic approach to healing and reconditioning and rehabilitation. So it was some of my best work. And then Major League Baseball called, and my boss was a big baseball fan. So he said, if you don't take it, I'm going to fire you. So I was a director of mental conditioning for a Major League Baseball team for 6 seasons, won a World Series there. COVID hit. I've been on my own consulting now. And back in the Army days, when I was working with the Army, I started pursuing a PhD in health promotion and wellness. I saw the need for looking at everything holistically. And I battled some hurdles along the way, some naysayers. And my entrance essay actually said one sentence, I want to legitimize the field of wellness. And that's still my driving force.
Yeah, I would love to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
We are really working on this word biophilia, right? Like that is sort of like, we come at that from two different angles, Jen and I, but we're really trying to think about, how can we be part of creating a movement, popularizing it, explaining it, not making it such a mouthful, and frankly, not letting it also get co-opted, which happens, right?
Absolutely.
So tell me a little bit, because where I work, the community that I live in is this neighborhood called Serenby, and we call ourselves a wellness community, and we don't have to get into what that means. But when I started working for them 10 years ago, no way could you use that term. Well-being was still hyphenated, wellness, like there was just sort of, if you really thought about it, or even like Global Wellness Institute, which I think we're all familiar with. I don't think it existed 10 years ago. And so spa was sort of maybe wellness. Like I'm not even sure, it's been so long. I think wellness has come so far, but I'd love to hear your point of view on that trajectory. Jen obviously comes at it from a beauty and nature perspective. I don't know. Tell me what your thoughts are on that, because I think it's fascinating how words can change meaning and have impact over time.
Well, I'm going to go all the way back to my English degree a million years ago. But one thing I learned was that words have meaning. And this is a really big topic for me. And I'm glad you brought it up, because part of that legitimizing the field of wellness is really helping people understand what that means. Because even within the program I was the master trainer for, and I was part of leadership, I had a director at the time who we were on a call, and he said, "We're not wellness. Wellness is soft." And I was thinking, I just applied to this PhD program in wellness. So I reached out to a mentor, and he said it helped change their mind about what wellness is. And I started really diving into who all belongs to the field of wellness. And I would see it everywhere, chiropractor's office. I would see it on, massage. A lot of the fields I already belong to. Folks would say that they belong to the wellness field. And I wouldn't disagree with that. But words have meaning, and we all have to be at least in the same book of music, if not on the same page. So I was driving through Lower Alabama one day, and I wish I had taken a picture of the name, but there was a plywood sign, and it was spray painted to say so-and-so's Moonshine and Massage Wellness Parlor.
Moonshine and wellness.
Moonshine and Massage Wellness. So that was the trigger for me. I was like, we really have to dive into this and help people understand. And I saw in other instances throughout my tenure working with the military in different places, resilience is another word that gets beat up a lot. Mindfulness is another word. And I think the biggest challenge is that these words get monetized, and people really bend it and shape it to meet the product they're selling. And I'm a capitalist as well. I mean, we live in a capitalist society. I like money. Sure. I like to keep the lights on, but not at the risk of pushing people away from things they need. Because if we walk away from wellness or biophilia or resilience, where the heck are we going to go?
I know.
Right? That keeps me up at night sometimes. And the answer to that is we're going to go to the next buzzword term that is just a watered down version of what we walked away from.
Yeah.
Because these are foundational truths. These are things that we need as a species to help us perform at our best and have the best quality of life. One of the things that I'm currently doing, I'm a senior fellow and a member of the board of directors at the National Wellness Institute. And one thing I love about NWI is that they simplify the terminology. And it's based on all of the work from Halpert Dunn, who was one of the originators of the wellness movement in the 50s and 60s. Okay. And they keep narrowing the definition to make it easy to digest and very sticky. And the current definition is 6 words long: functioning optimally within the current environment.
Wonderful.
There you go.
That's it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that really does create room at the table for everybody. They're also doing a wonderful job of standardizing wellness, creating a standardization and a certification that says, hey, I come from a different walk of life, but I'm willing to, as a professional, meet this certification to show that I've reached at least a baseline standard and we're all in the same book of music. Then I can put my twist on it however my field allows. But it just shows that we're all working together towards a greater good. And I see that now. I know, Jen, we have conversations about this. We're seeing it in the wellness space a lot. You're seeing it in the biophilia space a lot. It's sort of the Wild West. People are realizing they can monetize it, apps everywhere, books. I see it everywhere and I love it. It's a double-edged sword.
Sure.
I talk about it on the show that I host all the time. I want to see more people outside, but I also get frustrated when I go outside and it's overcrowded and trashed. And things are broken and destroyed. So we just all need to get on that same book of music together.
Absolutely. And I know I want to dive more into that work that you're doing, your holistic work and your speaking, but can you also tap and touch into your wonderful podcast as well?
Sure. Well, thank you for that. So I started this project, right at a calendar year ago. And it came out of a conversation I had earlier in the year, last year, with two different folks in a week's time. One was a young Navy veteran who just transitioned out. And we were actually at REI. I was looking for a pair of socks to go hiking, and he was helping me. And we were chatting about his service and what he wanted to do now. And he said, I know I want to work outside. I'm happier outside. And I started rattling off some of the science as to why that was the case. And he said, why don't we know about this stuff? And I said, okay. So
and he's working at REI.
Absolutely. And he said, it turns out he wanted to be a national park police officer. That's his ultimate goal. But he said, I'm working at REI right now until I figure out what's next, because at least I'm around like-minded, nature-centric people.
Yeah.
Right. And
but here it is, like, even those people, right? That's what it started. I was thinking they maybe don't know the stats and don't know the benefits.
Exactly.
They inherently feel it. And that's why they are in the
working
field.
there.
Yeah. But, right.
Yeah. And then I have two neighbors a few doors down that are both physicians. One is at Johns Hopkins, and they have two little boys who are constantly playing in the woods behind the neighborhood. And we were talking one day, and their mom is an oncology doc at Hopkins. And I was talking about some of the science about healing and different impact on different areas of health just with nature exposure. And she said, I'm a physician at one of the best institutions in the country. I've never heard any of this.
Wow.
Where do we get this information? And I said, well, that's it. I'm going to start a podcast. And
good.
I have an amazing co-host, Steve Otero. He's an Air Force veteran, a wounded warrior. He's someone I've known for years and years who used nature as a way to heal from his own injuries. And now he takes other veterans out into nature to heal as a veteran service officer. So
incredible.
It's been so fun. And I expected to be in this for 2 to 3 hours a week as a fun thing. And I'm in it for like 20 to 30 hours a week.
Oh, wow.
I used to tell people nature is the smallest part of what I do. And I can't say that anymore because this is just in the last calendar year. I've been keynoting all over the country. I've been doing graduation commencements, working with different organizations, companies, universities, all about what we talk about with the show. And it's incredible. Amazing.
Well, it's a beautiful intersection that you play at, Mark. I'm sorry, Monica, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I get so excited because, Mark, your background and your work, military, sports, your drive for more understanding of wellness, but of course, this whole connection, that thread of nature has always been there. And you come from it with such an interesting background and such an interesting perspective that I'm not surprised that, number one, your podcast has taken off in the past year, which I'm very excited about because I love your episodes too. I listen to all of them. And also the fact that you're doing speaking engagements, because again, that lens of PhD work, you're really committed to teaching and not just being like, spouting off stats. You're really, walking the walk every day. And that's a lot these days because a lot of people are just talking the talk, but they're not walking the walk like you are. So I love seeing the work that you're doing. And is there anything that you're surprised about in the past year, not just your podcast, but maybe people you've met or conversations you had that you're just surprised about things that you've experienced?
So much. I mean, honestly, I think maybe humbled is a better term. I'm completely humbled by the amount of people that are hungry for this. And we wanted to be a mouthpiece for all of the great work happening in the nature and the wellness space. That was our goal starting this. And it's just incredible to see the caliber of folks that are doing this work. I just wish they got more recognition. And that's the whole point of the show, is to really point out what they're doing. And the biggest surprise for me, to answer your question, Jennifer, is people reaching out, wanting to be a guest on the show and using it for like a book release or to help with a movie premiere. Or we worked with someone who was a contestant on The Voice who produced a song about suicide awareness and prevention, and it was raising money for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So we were able to have her on, and she performed on the show. And then anytime somebody clicked on her song, it was raising money for AFSP. So
amazing.
I never dreamed that we'd be able to use this mouthpiece for this much good this quickly. It's very, I'm overjoyed and overwhelmed at the same time every day, but it's been such a fun ride. And I'm really looking forward to expanding the business beyond the podcast. The podcast was just phase one, and I've constantly had to shift the priorities of what's next based on the feedback and the need. You mentioned that I live in this unique crossroad. I like to joke that I live at the corner of elite performance and high level wellness. And
nice.
One thing I've been doing with performance clients on the mental and emotional side for a long time is just having sessions outside, just doing walk and talks in nature. And when I was working in baseball, I had major league pitchers in the outfield with fly rods, teaching them about fly casting. And I'm a rabid fly angler. It's my passion, but I'm a terrible fly caster, right? But just having them outside and learning the rhythm and the meditative aspect and the sunshine and the breeze and being able to bring in the mindful component. I've been a mindfulness practitioner for almost 25 years now, daily meditator, outside as often as I can. So I try to pass that along. I've been very fortunate to keynote the Wellness Council of America conference recently, talking about nature and its impact on health and well-being, as well as kick off the National Wellness Conference with a nature activity and then do a session about nature as well. So
cool.
Great.
It's getting out there. People are wanting more of it, which is great.
Which is fantastic. Well, and I want to say, is this the current fellowship that you're doing with the University of Utah on substance abuse and mental health?
Well, so it's with Rocky Mountain University in Provo, Utah. And it basically, I'm an instructor there, and I do a lot of collaborations with them. And I teach an integrative therapies course there, which nature therapy is a piece of that, which is another outlet where I get to train caregivers, basically healthcare professionals, on how to utilize nature along with different allied and complementary practices like yoga, tai chi, qigong, but really getting people outside. And it's been so much fun. And I got the podcast bug, so I actually started a podcast for my class only.
Oh, no kidding. Cool.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
It's
so
like
we'll cover a topic. And then the next week we'll have an expert on from that discipline talking about how they can utilize it, no matter what their profession is, whether it's OT or PT or whatever, they can utilize based on just their background. And it's so much fun. I love talking about this. I've started doing all of my one-on-one sessions as often as I can outside, meeting in the state park and really using nature as a background and a canvas for the work. And I've seen such incredible, astronomical gains in adoption, retention, utilization. And it's magical. I don't know how else to say it. It's just amazing.
Well, and it's sort of fascinating, when physicians, because I think to your point about the friend at Johns Hopkins who's like, what? We don't learn any of this. The other thing that I think is fascinating is that physicians don't really have nutrition classes. They take like one nutrition class. They don't really understand it. But you have really cool groups like Wholesome Wave out of like the national, and they have local chapters that does basically food as medicine, and they will write prescriptions, and they work with different facilities, hospitals to do that. But I've also started hearing, physicians offering prescriptions to get outside. And both of those things sound ridiculous on the face of it, right? That I would have to write you a prescription to eat healthy food, and I would have to write you a prescription to get outside. But it's just sort of the state of where we are in the world, unfortunately. I sort of take that challenging thing and think about how we can make it into a more hopeful solution. Like when you're talking to people, like, you're doing this class, like what's their reaction? When you start to tell them beyond, I didn't know this.
Yeah, I know that's a great question. Everything you just said is so true. They do come from different healthcare backgrounds, and there's a varying degree of early adoption when we talk about certain things. Some professions by nature push back a little harder than others because they're very allopathically trained, very Western medicine. But once they dive into the science, and there is so much science out there for this, once they see it and they see that it's evidence-based and they see that it's peer-reviewed and they see that it's mixed methods and they see all of the boxes that they need checked for themselves to buy into it, then it's an easier sell. And then I give an assignment to always go out and do it yourself, report back before you try it with anybody else. And just, it's amazing. The first assignment and the last assignment are the exact same assignment, but to see the different answers between where they started and where they finished, it was tremendous. But to your point about caregivers and taking care of themselves and having to sell them on it, that's always been fascinating to me. That's one of the things I did with the Army. I created caregiver programs around compassion fatigue and burnout, self-care, wellness coaching. And this was, 2010 maybe. It was so fun to see their faces when they would come in and say, well, this isn't an Army class. Why are we here? And then by the end of the day, they loved it. And they would reach back out and say, well, we want more. And it started with one specific population of nurses in the Army. And within 6 months, I was teaching it to healthcare professionals throughout the entire system.
Wow. How did you come up with the program? You just come up with it yourself, or did you get guided by somebody else, or how did that happen?
It was a combination. I played off of a lot of the things that were part of my background already with performance psychology, with, different aspects. I spoke medical, which helped.
Yeah.
My mom was a nurse anesthetist for 40 years. So I was raised in that environment. So I would turn to my mom a lot, and she kept saying, if I had had this 40 years ago in school, I would have had a much different quality of life. So she was always my sounding board. And then it led to reaching out to other peers at different levels of healthcare. And we just had fun with it. And then I was always taking feedback from the classes. How can this be more relevant to you and your population? Really taking that one acronym out that always gets in our way. And that acronym is EGO. It just always gets in our way with our egos, right?
Yes, it does.
The acronym part of that I always use is easily gets offended.
I like that.
People with the biggest egos are usually the ones that get hurt.
I love it.
Right. So
it's funny.
And now as a board certified health and wellness coach as well, it's always funny to me that I have to sell people on being a better version of themselves. Right? It seems counterintuitive, but we've been socialized to live a certain way for the last 50, 60, 70 years. Right. And it's just basically untraining those bad habits.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think you've talked like garbage in, garbage out kind of thing all the time.
And that's not just nutrition, which is where that phrase gained popularity. It's your mental state. It's your spiritual well.
I think that yoga, as an example, has gone mainstream, right? That used to be some weird thing that people did, right? And meditation, you mentioned earlier, I think is getting pretty close. I mean, obviously the apps are crazy, but I think when you start seeing high profile corporate executives or coaches of sports teams meditating or getting their team to do yoga, that changes people's minds, right? And not to equate soft with women and hard with men, but society does kind of bucket everybody, right? And so once these things start getting utilized by both sexes, if you will, or both areas where, is that maybe that's cool now because whatever this football coach is doing it does help to mainstream these ideas. And so I think we're always concerned that does wellness start losing its meaning when it's the moonshine massage place down the street?
Right.
But maybe bring you a little bit of wellness.
Well, you're right. I mean, there are traditional gender biases. There are traditional myths, if you will, that we're fighting, but we still subscribe to, at least some of the population. And I think that it's just creating programs and different offerings for everybody. It doesn't have to be scary and hard. Make it hard.
I'm so glad you said that, Mark, because you're right. I think you talk a lot about wellness is not just for the 1%. It shouldn't just be for those who can afford it. Wellness is a human right. Nature is a human right. And the more that we talk about and educate the why it's a human right, I think the more there'll be more seats at the table. And like Monica always says, we talk about being squishy. It shouldn't be squishy. It is human health. And so thinking about nature connection or biophilic connection or biophilia, there's nothing squishy about it. It's scientifically proved. So it's funny that we have to keep talking about it as squishy or soft or being called a tree hugger, whatever you want to call it.
I hug trees. I admit it freely. It's funny that you say that you've both said this, because traditionally I've worked with some very machismo driven populations. Right? And I've tried to introduce some of these squishy, I'm doing air quotes for your listeners, topics to, I walk into a room in 2010 or 11 filled with Navy SEALs talking about meditation and mindfulness before it was mainstream. Right. And there are ways to do that. There are ways that exist, different terms in their lexicon that they understand that I could learn as a practitioner, because it's the art as well as the science. So the art of it is learning how to relate it to the population. Without that, the science doesn't matter. Without that, the science is for one academic to another. The art is taking that and filtering it down to the populations that need it in a way that they can understand and use it. So finding those ways to do it. But Jen, you mentioned that I talk about nature and how it's for everybody. And one of our big sayings is nature for all, wellness for all. And my favorite thing about nature, and I say this every chance I get a microphone in front of me, nature is the great equalizer. Nature doesn't care about race or gender or identity or money or political leaning. It doesn't care about any of the labels that we put on ourselves to keep us from loving each other the way we should. Nature is always there for us. It's always offering. It's never asking for anything. It just gives. And that's the most beautiful thing I can think of. And that's probably why nature is the most written about, most painted about subject ever. I mean, with what you do, Jen, we talked about this when you were on the show. Nature and beauty go hand in hand. They always have. And if you ask somebody to think about a beautiful moment in their life, most likely it's something to do with nature.
100%. 100%. Yeah, it's incredible. So kind of as we're starting to wrap up, I am curious, like, when did biophilia come into your world? I don't know, Jen, sort of, was that a touch point, or, were there a couple different ones? But, I feel like it was nascent. I think COVID brought biophilic design as a concept to people, because, you've got a plant behind you, or there's windows in front of me. What are those elements of how you can bring nature into your home or business? But, we're really trying to make it a big tent, not just this one element that biophilia is so many things. When did you first start hearing about it and start thinking about it?
Oh, before I knew what the term was to describe it, it's always been a part of life. We've always had plants in the house. I've always preferred natural building materials, all of the things that would traditionally fall under biophilic design now. I also work with a lot of different types of clients on the performance and wellness side. And one group is construction. So I know that biophilic design in construction is a huge topic in the last few years. So without really understanding, this is the term that goes with this concept. And Jen, absolutely, you were the one that introduced me to this before we ever met. Big fan of your work, big fan of the Walks with Walsh, everything else.
Thank you.
But just our conversations since the episode that you were on have just really opened my eyes to what's possible out there. And I really do think that this is something that we have to consider moving forward. We have to. We can't turn our backs on technology, right? Technology is not going away. AI is not going away. But we have to meet each other where we are and start incorporating elements of the natural world where we are. And I get asked a lot about virtual nature. And I would like to ask both of you, as the Biophilic Solution hosts, where does virtual nature fall in biophilic design or biophilia?
I think virtual nature is better than no nature, right? Always getting out and physically being close to the trees and the light and the sun and the dirt and everything, right, is always the number one, right? Even I got up from my desk and walked 2 blocks to grab lunch, and it's sort of through the woods is where we live. And that was just perfect. And it changed my demeanor, just those 5 minutes. I think it's interesting to think about, because there's some really cool things happening digitally or maybe I should even say synthetically, right? Where there's an incredible show that's going to open, I think it's at the Denver Art Museum, Jen, right? It's a biophilic show, but it's art. And so you're inside, but it's different pieces of art sort of mimicking things in nature, right? But I think you just can never get past the real thing, So I think better than nothing, the virtual, but I was horrified to see, I went to UC Santa Barbara and I was horrified to see the dorm that they were trying to build with no windows. And it was all artificial light and artificial air, pumped in air and all this stuff. And they talked about how that it's just as good. It's not. But if you are somewhere like in space, you can't have it, then yes, let's put, a digital tree on the wall for you on the spaceship. But that just saddens me to no end to think that that would be our only exposure.
Mm-hmm. I like that answer, Monica.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, sorry to put my podcast host hat on for a second.
I know, really. We never get asked questions.
I think it's fun to get asked.
I get asked all the time. And honestly, I was just in Florida working with the university, and they were telling me that their big hospital system there just built a new ER that was filled with windows. And I'd never heard of that before. Wow. So they're starting to embrace the healing aspect of nature views with healthcare. And I thought that was fantastic. So just curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, that's great.
No, thank you for the question. That was great. I don't know, Jen, if you have any other, but I think Jen feels even stronger than I do about it. Like, no.
I know. No. I definitely believe that technology has, we need technology. It helps educate. It helps share the word. But Mark and I have had these conversations, I think, a few times about the amount of apps that have filled the marketplace and tell you about. And I think we innately already know. We innately already know what's good for us. I know. Just the whole commodifying of nature makes me feel uncomfortable. And again, like you talked about being a capitalist society, I understand like everyone has to make money. But at the same time, I do believe VR is great for those that don't have access to nature. Like it's better than nothing, better than no nature at all, which I definitely believe that. And going inside to these experiences, which is great to learn more about nature. But the app thing is really, I think, it's too many, and people are just trying to make money off of the ease and everyone being just like, oh, it's comfortable. I just need someone to tell me how to feel instead of using our own intuition, which I think we need to tap back into is our own intuition to knowing.
What both of you have said, just get outside.
Yeah.
We just need, it's a real simple solution. Yeah. And again, back to the capitalism. It's like, oh, if we can't put money on it, then it's not real or it's not worth it. It's like, no, let's just actually think that it's okay to just walk outside and just take a walk. Don't worry about, making money on it. Just get out.
Yeah.
Well, I think those apps, the technology, if they're not saying as a punchline, go outside, then it's confusing to me because just like with meditation, it can only take you so far.
Exactly.
And you have to be able to do it by feel because you're not going to have your phone or an app with you all the time. And the only technology I ever had to enjoy nature was the street light that I mentioned earlier. When that came on, I had to be home. So that's where I'm coming from with it.
Yeah.
It's a great question, Mark.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, we're definitely going to let everybody know about the podcast. Is there anything you want to share? You sort of alluded to some new expansion of the brand, or are you not ready to announce anything?
It's currently in the works, so I don't want to say too much just yet, but hopefully later this year, and I'll definitely keep you both posted, shouting it from the mountaintop as it happens.
Good.
We will share away. We will share away for you.
Yeah, I'm the worst promoter. The joke with me is I'm always the most experienced person in my field you've never heard of. And that's
well, you're the most humble. You're the most humble person I've met in a very long time, Mark. And you're so acclaimed in all your work. So,
oh my God,
and you are so humble. You do such incredible work for so many people. And I think more people need to know about you and your work. So I'm hoping that we can share that with our guests and they can
appreciate you for that.
Get to know you better.
Well, we're excited, and we'll put all the links in the show notes, and just super excited to get to meet you. Jen talked so much about you, and can't wait to see what you do next.
Well, thank you, and thank you both for this show. Honestly, what you're doing is so important, and like I said, I'm a fan, and I talk to people all the time that just love the show, love both of you. So thanks so much for this.
That's great to hear.
So I thought there was a lot of profound insights in our conversation with Mark. And I'm curious about what you think your biggest takeaways might be.
The first thing that comes to mind in our conversation was language, and especially the terms we all use: wellness, mindfulness, resilience, and of course, biophilia. So Mark's bachelor degree is in English, and I'm a nerd about language. So that whole conversation was really interesting to me. But also on a societal level, we tend to commoditize these terms and potentially water down their meaning. So I like that talking about getting to the heart of the term wellness, something that we should embrace in a more holistic way.
Yes, I think that's really interesting as well, especially when you think about the quote macho and the spaces that Mark has worked in, that he hears people describe wellness as soft and squishy over and over again, but he's still beating the drum and finding really effective and dynamic ways of bringing people into wellness by meeting them exactly where they are.
Well, and it's also interesting to think about the role that nature plays in Mark's work. It seems like it's something that he's always been working with and on, but over the years, he's built it up into his practice because he's really seen the impact and effects firsthand on his clients.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And I loved hearing Mark talk about nature being the great equalizer. No matter who you are, where you're coming from, whether you're a veteran or an athlete or whoever, you will just benefit from just getting out in nature.
Yep. And, getting outside, it can be so simple. And Mark seems really committed to getting back to basics, which is pretty refreshing in this day and age. I stand by what I said about the virtual nature is obviously infinitely better than zero nature. And, Jen, you and I know some of those really cool, immersive virtual experiences can be really awe-inspiring. But we live in a world with so many constant screens and apps and notifications and gadgets. Those things can optimize our lives, but I just feel like we really need to find time and space to get out in nature as often as we can.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I couldn't agree more. And I do love Mark in a sense, the fact that he walks the walk and talks the talk. And he is such an avid fly fisherman. And he always loves talking about how much he loves to fish. And again, he spends so much time outside with his dog. And he talks about this a lot on his platform, just being around the spaces that really impact his own health, and then shares that with his audience in such beautiful and profound ways and the people that he speaks to. So I just find it also beautiful. So on a side note, we've got some great resources in our show notes for anyone who's interested in learning more about Mark, which I think you all should, and listening to his podcast and all the amazing things he has to offer.
Yeah. And I really can't wait to just see what he does next. I just think he is a gem. And thanks for bringing him to the podcast and to all of our listeners, Jen.
I know. He's wonderful. We'll see you soon, Monica.
Thanks, Jen. Bye. Thanks so much for listening. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we would love for you to follow us on your favorite podcast app, give us a 5-star rating, and please leave us a review.
It really goes such a long way towards helping us reach a wider audience and sharing these amazing interviews and solutions with the world.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for following and reviewing the podcast, and we'll be back with another amazing interview in 2 weeks. You're now a part of the Biophilic movement.